Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Thanks, everyone, for joining our webinar today on navigating the intersection of artificial intelligence and intellectual property in the public sector. We have an awesome panel today, and we're going to go over a number of topics as it relate to AI and IP creation and enforcement, legal and ethical considerations as it relates to AI in the public sector, and strategies for protecting AI generated innovations. I have three awesome panelists: Spencer Schaefer with the VA, Bill Galkin with Galkin Law, and Tushar Rathod with the Center of Applied AI at UMBC. We'll start off with speaker intros, but for attendees, we'll be saving this session and doing a write-up that we'll send out to all registrants within probably 24 or 36 hours. And then if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them as we're going through the back and forth. If not, we'll add the questions at the end. But we have a pretty aggressive list of topics to go through. But let me start with a quick intro of each panelist. Spencer, you were on my big screen, so we'll start with you. So just a little bit on your background as it relates to AI.
Yeah, so Spencer Schaefer, I'm, like you said, with Department of Veteran Affairs. I'm a Chief AI Officer for the VISN 15 region and a Senior Advisor to kind of digital health general, Office Enterprise Integration, and many others. My primary role is more on the architecture engineering side, but obviously provide a lot of guidance, consultation, and experience with many of the topics today, especially with our growth of IP.
Thanks, Spencer. Next, Bill.
Hi, this is Bill Galkin. Excuse my voice, I have a bit of a cold, but I'm with Galkin Law. I've been focusing on technology for my entire career, and over the last couple of years, AI has become a central focus. I represent AI companies or companies which just are incorporating AI, and it really hits every industry, and it's been very challenging. And every day there's something new to work on.
Great, thanks, Bill. And Tushar.
Thank you. Name is Tushar Rathod, and I'm helping UMBC set up and operationalize the Center for Applied AI, and we are doing a number of interesting things. My background and expertise is in product management and adoption, and we are thinking through and advising on product strategy, AI infusion, AI native products, and thinking through a lot of how AI will work as we shape the what's to come, right?
Awesome, Tushar. And I'm Michael Crosby, CEO of Leadership Connect. So we're a data intelligence business. We work with about 1,200 public sector clients, from the White House to federal agencies to contractors to think tanks. Our focus on AI is helping people execute around AI policy in procurement. I'm excited about the topic because I graduated with a degree in econometrics. So I actually get to live my degree as opposed to doing some totally different career. So I've been working on, within data modeling and technology for pretty much my whole career. So I love the intersection of AI and IP because it's so interesting. And I thought we'd start with our first topic questions, really a definition here around AI and IP. I think in our panelist prep, there's a thought: how much different is AI as it relates to any other IT initiative? Or do you kind of look at the patent office and say that anything that is generated by a machine is inherently not a proprietary work? So maybe we'll start with Spencer. Just like when you think of like general IP considerations for AI in the federal government, what do you think of?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the primary thing we look at, and I'll kind of get to a little bit more of your specific in a minute, but a lot of what we have to look at is like how much of our property, right, whether that's data, resources, human capital, is used to help co-develop something, right? If we develop internally, straightforward, right? Like if it meets the criteria, then we do it. Where we really get into it, and actually where we've been leveraging, is this kind of cooperative IP, right? Where we can leverage industry and academic partners. I think with that comes then into kind of identifying the source of the idea, right? The source of the concept, source of the innovation, and how much that may be attributed to some sort of modeling or AI, etc. Where it gets interesting with me is, and this is something that Mr. Culkin will talk quite a bit about, I'm sure, is the idea of like idea versus innovation versus standard patent, right? And I think that this new realm we have is a lot of times in that world of ideation and innovation. And the source of it, I think what we do and what we have to think about is one, what happened prior to something, some idea, some innovation that was generated by AI, right? Like, was it really an idea that had human factors behind it, like human influence, or is it just simply like you did something, you asked a question, and got like an idea that was truly generated by AI?
Excellent. Thanks, Spencer. Bill, you're name checked by Spencer, and as the lawyer in the group, maybe you should be have a strong affinity towards definitions. Like when you think of AI and IP, and what it really means in a public sector setting, how do you look at it?
Yeah, so the IP issues we know there, as far as the output of the of AI, we know that's right now it's viewed as not protectable either by patent or by copyright. That's something which is bound to evolve over time. There's already sort of discussions going on that topic as far as how much human involvement has been input into the results. So if there's a straight output of either a patentable idea or a copyrightable material, right now that's not protectable, but then there's really how much human input goes into it, and that requires really a study of the actual development process, and also it requires, from a best practices standpoint, really documentation as far as documenting what the process of development is, so that there can be some claim to at least some component of what is developed through through that process. But I think, from my standpoint, I also have to look at each different component of when we talk about very often we're looking at the actual output of the AI generative process, but there are many different layers that go into what could be subject to intellectual property in the AI environment. And that includes initially looking at the data sources, and then we look at, there's an examination of what those come from. Are there potential infringement issues that originate from the data sources themselves? Then there's the actual structure, which is the LLMs or the engines, the algorithms that are actually generating. So they're not the AI output, but they're part of the structure. They're part of the value that they're part of the whole process that is being implemented, and that needs to be viewed. That can be viewed from straight intellectual property protection standpoint, because that's basically code. So you have data, you have code, and then you have the output. So there's really three different components that each one has to be examined independently and determine whether and how much intellectual property protection can be applied.
Excellent. And then finally, Tushar, you had a little bit different take.
I do. Being a product person, I think about these things slightly differently, and I'll leave the legal piece to the experts here. But when I think of AI, I think of three key things. One is AI in the context of an individual. Second is AI in the context of a process, and third is in the context of a product, right? So when, as an individual, if I'm using AI to think through a very complex problem and I open up, I don't know, Claude or Gemini 1.5, and I think and brainstorm with that, what am I doing? Is it still my thought, not my thought? How much credit do I have versus not? Right. So that's a set of considerations as my sort of thinking buddy. The second piece, when I think of it from a process standpoint, and I'm thinking at this point, enterprise level or team-centric processes, and this is the work that I was doing anyways, but maybe in a very manual manner or semi-automated manner. And now AI can help me do it better. And I provide inputs to AI and say, okay, make this process better by optimizing this. These are essential steps, these are non-essential steps, and this is how I want you to optimize this. And based on that, I either feed the training data, give it feedback, fine-tune it, right? There are all kinds of different things we can do, ragging and fine-tuning and all of that to make the AI work. So in that case, how do we think about that, right? Becomes interesting. The third piece is even more interesting from a product standpoint. When I productize AI, and I'm going to break it down into two pieces, AI-infused products versus AI-native products, right? So AI-infused products are products that are already existing, and then AI comes in and makes them better or makes them more effective. Where is that line when AI makes my product more effective, whether it is in terms of adoption of the product, use of the product, when I have used that user's data set to make the algorithm better or contextualized for that particular user, right? And then AI native products, which we are just beginning to see emerge, where they come off of, let's say, Llama 3.1 or something like that, and based on that platform, the entire experience is completely different. It's as if you are talking to a person, in this case, not a real person. And then when that model sort of builds that product, customizes that product, gets better and better with AI engineers working in the background, right? Then what does that look like, feel like? How does that work, right? So many different dimensions and perspectives. No one clear answer, but an interesting set of questions and perspectives.
Thanks, Tushar. I know for using chat bots, I invariably start typing the word agent, pretty quickly. So I think we're still early
Right.
days on a lot of this. Our next topic, we could probably spend the whole hour on. So data privacy, compliance, transparency. Homeland Security just released AI guidelines for critical infrastructure about 4 hours ago. The CEOs of Salesforce and NVIDIA have nice testimonials, and I think they're in part of a committee that help with those guidelines. And the words data privacy and transparency were referenced a number of times. And we think about government, the public sector, it's inherently working with publicly available information subject to a FOIA. But then Spencer, think of you over at the VA, you're working with health records. Then we think of data going into LLMs. There's a question on the chat related to would the panelists' answers be different if an employee, federal employees working at home versus being in office. So when you're thinking about, again, it's a broad question, data privacy, compliance, transparency, what should the audience consider? And maybe Bill, we'll start with you on it. I think you're on mute, Bill.
Thank you. There are various laws which require transparency. I mean, obviously, there's the Freedom of Information Act, there's the Open Government Data Act, and there are different laws that require it. So those are legal requirements. There's also just the concept of transparency that needs to be promoted in order to have the public trust of what is going on. When we're using AI, there's decision-making processes going on with AI, and those decision-making processes are components of the data that's being input and the process that's making that decision. And the transparency, the purpose is to make sure that there's a fair and unbiased decision-making process going on by government, because these decisions are impacting citizens, and that's really the main concern. So as far as the transparency, there's an obligation to publish the information, publish the data sources, make the public aware of and also make the public aware of the process through which those data sources are used and what the decision-making process is like. So that's really a best practice, and there are legal requirements, and then there's really the best practice of making this information public. As part of that is also having a vehicle which allows for the public to comment on it, because ultimately the public is impacted by these decision-making processes. So there are ways of having public input once that information is put out there, and it's really all for the purpose of getting to the right result, which requires this back and forth between the government agencies and the public in order to achieve that. There's a lot of room for, as we know, there's been a lot written on this. There's a lot of room for bias in the data that's being used, and there's a lot of room for bias in also just the algorithm which is used for making the decisions through that. So that's certainly an issue. And data privacy, I think we're all aware of certain data is private. Obviously, HIPAA information is private, and there needs to be really a review and an audit process to make sure that that information is all being used correctly.
Spencer, what are your thoughts on data privacy, compliance, and transparency?
Oh man, we could go for hours, right? First, I think I'm surprised you can ask the question, given that international law prevents the use of landmines, and so I'm not sure what we're going to do with that. It is it's a very complex topic, right? And I think that to sum it down as briefly as I can, I think you have to look at a couple of different. I think you look at business rules and technology, right? Like you can use both of those to help make sure that you properly secure your data and exchanges. And I think that when we look at business rules, I think one of the things that we do have in healthcare, particularly in the VA, is we have very robust processes, right, for initiating projects. So you have institutional review boards. You've got innovation processes that we have in place. But the bottom line is anytime it's a human-based business rule, like we're always going to have some issues with it. I think the second thing is technology, and that's really the big topic, right? Is like what level of I guess if we wanted to put like regulations around like what tier of security is needed for a technology to trust, so that we can entrust that data transform, that data transmission. And I think that we struggled with that for a very long time. I think that it actually prohibited us in a lot of ways from being able, and righteously so, like being able to share like true VA data. And I think that one way we were getting around that for a while was this concept of obfuscation, anonymization of data, and then finally moving more into the realm of synthetic data production. And I think that synthetic data production for any corporation, any industry, has a lot of value. What we found was synthetic data production at the time, a couple of years ago, was just not at the real-time transactional type level that you need to do machine learning models, right? It was more geared toward aggregated type data. I think that's improving a lot. And then finally, I think that where we really see some major advances going on is not only with LLM, right? Like technology, in which we're able to orchestrate LLMs as well as put guardrails, like internal guardrails within data that's being transmitted back and forth. And then finally, some really, I think there's been some great opportunities that this has brought about for a lot of industry, like intelligence and Department of Defense partners, I guess I would say. There's a lot of really great technology that's being more publicly available now, that will like quantum encrypt, right? Or, be quantum resistant hacking type stuff where you do end-to-end, like full end-to-end encryption, where the user at the other end can't even see, any of the secure data pieces, but they are able to still utilize that data in a very useful way. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Spencer. Tushar, in our prep, you talked about mapping data sources. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so to me, data privacy compliance is non-negotiable, right? I think that's a given. The question really is, how do we do it? And there are all kinds of challenges around that. And there are a number of reasons for that. One is with AI, now we are for the first time looking at such massive data sets. And forget about the LLMs that that these big tech companies are developing. Even talking about deployment within agencies or enterprises, we're talking about such massive amounts of data going back decades, perhaps. So how do you deal with that kind of a data set and ensure privacy, right? Our traditional tools are sort of not equipped for that. We didn't even have that kind of thinking at the time these traditional tools, non-AI tools, were developed or used for a number of years, right? So there are two ways, and there are multiple ways to think about it, but two ways that I use is one is existing data and second is new data, right? So if you have existing data that you're dealing with, which is a big problem right now, which is where a lot of big consulting companies are coming in and doing a lot of data engineering, and we are advising our clients on those kinds of things to see how do you clean up that data and get it AI ready so that AI tools can be developed safely. That requires a certain amount of data recognition, data labeling. How do you deal with structured data versus unstructured data? There are some great AI tools available to help with labeling. Now, how good of a job are they doing? Well, that is not only a matter of opinion, but it's also very hard to analyze that. How are you going to analyze that? Using another AI tool, right? Potentially, because the sheer size of it doesn't allow you to do manual checks unless you're spot checking, right? So those are kinds of challenges that we are working through, and there is a better way to handle structured data than unstructured data. But a lot of focus there, including big cloud providers, Oracle, Snowflake, others. Then comes the topic of new data. So as we generate massive amounts of data every day, a good practice that can or should be implemented is labeling at source. So as you generate the data, how do you label the data at source so that you identify this is PII, this is PHI, this is for public consumption, this is for certain type of permission only. And that whole framework, proper framework needs to be evolved within the context of an enterprise or an agency, and implementation mechanisms to, when you pipe data, when you stream data, when you have event-centric data, when you have metadata, how do you handle all of those? Right? So again, a lot that needs to go into it to make it happen, but I think that's an exciting field.
Thanks, Tushar. I know for my company, is a data business, we're under fairly significant data privacy constraints, but we often think of like what are we legally obligated to do and what seems ethical to do, where the ethical considerations usually constrain us more than the legal considerations. So we collect a lot of personally identifiable information, and even though you can legally collect a lot of information on an individual, their family, tax bracket, political beliefs, whatever, it doesn't mean it's ethical, to put into the product. So I'd also add, in addition to whatever legal legal or procedural guardrails you have, there's also the ethical one in terms of, ethical, data collection, and disclosure that many of us have to consider when running our organizations.
I was wondering if I could make one other comment real quick. I think
Sure.
it's kind of interesting, right? Like, I think we focused on the front end. I think what I'm seeing too is being so involved in the government, right, and kind of concerns, and working with some of the security companies is there's definitely a major need to protect IP, right? And so I think that one of the really cool things that we're able to see out of the push to help solve this issue of releasing, health information, whatever, is the reverse side of that same technology being able to be used to help protect American interests, American IP technology things.
That's a great point, Spencer. So now we're going to move to it's slightly different topic. In our prep calls, Bill made a good point of differentiating corporate, minimizing corporate liability from a company's perspective versus public sector procurement, where obviously you have different, legal thresholds, but then there's a threshold of integrity, and how do we put together a solution that achieves a high level of integrity, not just conforms to minimizing liability. So, for instance, are the output models fair? Is there ethical data, collection? When I think of liability, I think of the recently released, DHS AI guidelines. Not surprising from DHS, there's a cybersecurity aspect to it where you have this huge attack surface. You have the AI model, you have the cloud service provider, you have any other programming on top of it. There's a lot of places where there's a risk of something going wrong. So getting to the question, like when you think of achieving, high integrity in AI initiatives within the public sector, what should you consider? And Tushar, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so we think about those things and think about the data ownership piece and going back to some of the thinking we were just doing around the ethical pieces and all of that. I mean, there are some very interesting things that are emerging. For example, NIST has a very good RMF risk management framework that's becoming very popular with implementation guidelines. There's an institution in the UK called the Alan Turing Institute. MIT has published a lot of very good sources. There are at least 120, 125 known publications from different think tanks and agencies and private institutions, even big tech, to say how should we handle this whole thing around data privacy, compliance, liability, integrity, ownership, those kinds of things. And one of the interesting thing we decided to do at the center at UMBC was last month we said, all right, what if we fed all of this into a small language model in AI, and what might that come out to be? And so we started doing that experiment, and we did that with Llama 3.1, and we started really figuring out how some of these things can be implemented. Again, this is using AI for AI to make AI responsible. So there is some irony built into that whole approach right there. But at some point, we will just have to make the tools smart enough to be able to handle these things. It's I mean, in some ways, it is no different from humans ensuring other humans are, straight and narrow and doing what they're supposed to do. And why not use AI in that sense as well to say, the way to deal with this is going to require a fundamentally different approach, a different mindset. So, but a lot of good initiatives happening around the world that we are keeping an eye on. So more to come.
Awesome, thanks, Tushar. Bill, this is more or less your topic, and if you want to give it from a federal contractor response point of view, that's great as well.
Yeah, it's I look at it in terms of a process. I mean, like Tushar is talking about the details of, how to arrive at what does it mean to have integrity? What does it mean to have, be fair and, non-biased in the processes? Um, that I leave, that's left to the client, that's left to the agency to define those. What are the ethical rules that they want to comply with? So all that needs to be thought about. Boards can be created to monitor that. But then there's a process, and that's really sort of where more I get into, is really that once you determine what the standards are, then you need a process. The process is often going to be one that results in auditing yourself. You define what you mean by integrity, but then you have to be able to back that up. So you need to first audit and verify that you've accomplished what your goals are. But then, especially with AI, I mean, things are changing all the time. The systems are evolving and the inputs are changing and how they're being used are changing. And you need to have regular audits really in order to be able to maintain that you've defined the standards. Now you've got to maintain those standards. So that really can't just be, thought about at the beginning and then just sort of left to run. Otherwise, it's gonna, you're gonna lose, you're gonna lose contact with what's really going on. So that's before and after deployment. That's really what has to be done. But then there's another level, and that we're going to get into, I think, a little bit more later. Is just that's government working within its own parameters. But then you're dealing with vendors, and vendors have their own data sources. They make representations when you put out a bid and you're working with a vendor. They make representations about in their responses. They're going to make a lot of representations that are you're looking at they are compliant with your standards, and yet you're going to have to test those out also. So there really needs to be a whole testing process that goes in when you're using vendors also, and those testing processes have to be independent and have to be operated by the government to verify that. And then again, there's the ongoing process of validating the vendor compliance with those rules as projects and systems continue to be used.
And Spencer, Bill referenced agencies providing guidelines. We had a question on the chat as far as, is there any standardization around how this information is disclosed? Is this posted on the agency website or within an RFI? If you can, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, so it's incredibly complex and it's taken us a while to get around it, but it is where we started. So we did start right there with the trustworthiness, right? The trustworthiness principles. And we have developed a lot of good structure within ourselves that, we kind of collaborate with Duke and, some of the other organizations on this to try to help guide those pathways as well. I think Tushar was dead on when he spoke about take advantage of what's out there, the risk modeling that NIST has and others. I think the second is what we're doing, and hopefully this would become a public sourced type system, but we are actually building a full end-to-end trustworthy AI product, right? So where we have a massive, thanks to web services and what we can do now, we have our cloud services where we have a massive hub in the middle, right, which works as the spider to integrate MLOps and integrate regulate everything. So that from the time of ideation, you can submit your idea. It helps provide inventory lists and other of ongoing projects. Also helps to guide you down the right path of like where to build this out of, or if it's a vendor product, where to go. And then finally, like automates the integration into like our machine learning ops and reporting out and so forth. So I think that's that's kind of where we see it. We don't know how we can wrangle the cats if we don't do something like that. And I think to kind of build off the AI monitoring AI, I think that we're becoming much more comfortable with that with multi-agent based technology, right? Like as we're able to train, like I just saw a demo yesterday where about claims in general, and they've trained attorney agents, right? And the one benefit to that is like anytime a new regulation comes out, it immediately ingests it, and is able to work that. And some of those like insurance type claims regulations and law are pretty complex. So I think that's really the center, right? I think the key is like how do you integrate technology from end to end, and how do you leverage, I would take just to the step of agent based, right? Like, you really utilizing highly skilled persona agents to help with each of those nodes as you're working.
Excellent. Thanks, Spencer. I mean, it's a good next question, following on this topic, looking at, risk management for safety and rights impacting AI. So when you think of, we talked a little bit about it with your example, Spencer, of like claims adjudication, those are making decisions that impact people's lives, and we think of AI models, determining outcomes such as that, health, safety. When you think about, the DoD using AI within, different, weapon systems, obviously, the outcomes are at a different level. I know internally, my CTO always uses the example, like if someone comes to us with an AI model and they say it's 95% accurate, like what's the 5% that's inaccurate? And if you don't know that, we use the poison Cheerio example. If there's one poison Cheerio in a box, you're not gonna be too excited serving it to your family for breakfast. So how do you think about mitigating risks where you think of claims adjudication? I mean, that would take, dozens of lawyers to go through what a model can figure out in a relatively short period of time. No offense, Bill. Maybe we'll start with Tushar with an answer on this one.
So great story about the Cheerios. I love that. The one thing that we are seeing in the hallucination world is, in the past when the Chat GPT and all that was new, we were seeing all these X posts like, look at what I said and what AI model told me or whatever, right? The models have gotten better. And because they have gotten better, what has happened is that hallucination is not as explicit. So it has become extremely difficult to figure out what part of it is true and what part of it is untrue. The second interesting aspect is AI models by design are confident, and they need to inspire confidence in their response, or else no one will use them. Right. So by nature, by design, AI models are meant to be confident, and that creates a world in which it's getting harder and harder to figure out, what is true versus what is not. Right. Going back to some of the thinking we were just doing, like right, we talk extensively about data, and primarily data in terms of training AI and use of that data and stuff. I think of it as my childhood experiences to say, okay, that's what made me, because that data sort of, made those experiences collectively, had an impact on me. But then there was me by itself. The same two individuals with the same childhood experiences don't end up the same way, right? Twin brothers or whatever. So there is the algorithm piece of the data of the AI model. And then there is the inferencing engine, which basically is, do I think before I talk, or do I just blurt out whatever comes to mind, right? So there are all kinds of safety overlays that are coming on top of, and Google has done a great job at implementing some of those since its initial blunder of the founding fathers image that it famously generated, that looked nothing like our founding fathers, right? So all of those things are collectively taking us to hopefully where we want to be. Specifically coming to vendor claims, that's an application that we have to think through. We have to think about a number of different things. One is large language model the right way to go about it, or should it be a small language model, or any particular application of law? Should it be a large language model which is fine-tuned for a specific set of applications? So fine-tuning is becoming very popular for specialized applications. And then, Michael, you were talking about what was it that was released 4 hours ago? New guideline,
The DHS AI
right.
guideline.
So whenever these things are introduced, we need to incorporate them directly into the flow, because in the AI world, things move really fast, and that's where RAG comes in, where you have the AI engine ingest real-time data to incorporate that into making those decisions to say, vendor claims like this should be treated like that, and they would immediately, consume that. So there are some very interesting use cases that are evolving. Some of these are being incorporated by SaaS providers. Some of these will be very specific to a company or an enterprise. Some others, so we'll end up, my guess is we'll end up using a combination of these. Just like we use a combination of lawyers to make a decision on a certain claim, we would probably end up using a combination of different AI agencies, and that claim will go through a series of those things until it comes out with a set of recommendations. The only other thought I have is we should not be thinking about AI only in a AI world. We should be thinking about a very intelligent incorporation of real intelligence, which is the humans, right? So there is a concept in the AI world, even in AI development, called human in the loop. And that needs to be a part of what the problems we solve with AI, and that needs to be by design.
Excellent. Thanks, Tushar. So let's go to Bill. I know Tushar and Spencer mentioned examples where they're trying to put you out of business, Bill, by moving legal analysis to AI, but risk management seems like an inherently lawyer-centric topic. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's probably the most important topic regarding AI is risk management because of the roles it can play in various areas. You mentioned health, safety, rights. It can have a huge impact. And so regarding any kind of a system, the initial perspective has to be that there's a comprehensive risk and impact assessment, right? Some systems, okay, the risk is really low as far as what if it doesn't make the right decisions? What is the impact going to be on the constituency of this particular system? But other systems that you mentioned, military, but there are many other types of systems which could have a very serious impact. And so the risk assessment has to be done, and based on the risk assessment is going to define what kind of controls you put into place and how much time and effort you put into trying to create those controls. So the step one is understanding what the risks are and what the impact is from a particular system. But what Tushar mentioned, the human in the loop. I mean, ultimately, we have to take responsibility for the output of these systems, and humans have to be in the loop. Humans have to be there have to be gatekeepers at certain points before a decision that has a high potential impact gets actually implemented. And that does need to be in there because we need to take ownership of the results of these systems. So that always has to be a part of it. So that's really, again, it's a risk analysis and then determining what are the potential, what are all the various types of things that we can put into place to protect against that. Regarding data, of course there are things of anonymization, and there's security protocols regarding data. That those are things which are well known. But one of the challenges with AI is, and again, I'm not an AI expert from a technology standpoint, but my understanding is AI can make a decision, but for us to reverse engineer and determine how that decision was made is not always an easy process. At the extent that a decision is made which has a negative impact or could have a negative impact, there has to be some kind of ownership of that decision-making process as well. So that needs to be that needs to be a part of the thought and the planning when implementing AI.
Excellent. So let's move to Tushar, you referenced it, our next topic, vendor claims. In September, the White House and OMB put out guidelines for acquisition of AI services. Vendor claims being accurate was one of the line items in that. I mean, I think when all of us see commercials or brochures today, I always think like, what doesn't use AI, from every car, food item. It's almost comical. Like there's a good example of I think the Roomba claiming to use AI, and at the end of the day, there's a group in Peru that's like physically typing in, this is the chair, this, this is the kitchen island, this is the toilet. So let's start with Spencer. You're on the receiving end. So when you think about, vendor claims, and you've been in, the IT space for a while, so exaggerated vendor claims is a topic that predates artificial intelligence. Like,
Yeah.
how do you separate fact from fiction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that 20 years experience, I mean, I don't know, right? I mean, like, I think that's where it is very important to have subject matter experts at your disposal, right? It doesn't have to be on your team, but whether you have a networked group somehow or you're using blogs, it's critical, I mean, I think it's very easy for people to use big words and make small incremental changes to a technology that also sounds nice and great. But in reality, there's others in the market that provide greater challenges. So I think to really summarize it, I mean, I think it's very important that um, function like a pharmacist. It's a big thing, right? Like where you do the market research. It's just no different. I view it this way, like it's no different me trying to find the right treatment for a patient than it is me trying to discover, the which technology is best for what we do or claims, like what are the claims. I think that secondarily, it's having those subject matter experts available. And I think where we're seeing a huge gap right now is with cloud computing knowledge, right? Like, I always speak a lot to like cloud computing isn't about computing. It's about brand new, amazing services that become available to you. You know what I mean? And if you don't know those services, you don't understand Delta Lake, Data Lake, all of that stuff. Um, like you're not able to make really informed decisions, right? And so I think finally is, like within the federal government, and there's always really good examples of previous, say, RFIs and others that have gone out, and just some of it's easy as that. Like do your research there, see what others have done.
Excellent. Tushar, your
Yeah.
your group's involved in training people, at federal agencies and industry around AI. What's your perspective?
Yeah, very cool. Spencer, I like your definition of cloud, by the way, as a collection of services, right? It's a very unique perspective. So in the context of claims and these are some very complex problems. I mean, several agencies struggle with, and if you look at the queue or the wait times for several of these claims across these agencies, they will all tell you that they would want to do a better job, right? I would almost flip the question from saying, the risk of using AI on claim adjudication to the risk of not using AI. Like there is a huge risk, like in the future state, the wait times, acceptable wait times will change. The whole, as AI gets more and more adopted, it will become the norm that I have a much tighter SLA than what is acceptable today, right? So if you think of AI in some ways as a sum total of multiple subject matter experts, whether legal or otherwise, all incorporated into one or some combination of engines or a combination of services, as Spencer put it, would potentially be a lot more effective at making right decisions while incorporating human in the loop and making sure there are right benchmarks and safety pieces and privacy pieces and all in place. But I mean, in the future, I think we may have a conversation, and that not too far out, maybe in a couple of years, 2 to 4 years, we may say, okay, why isn't that company using AI? And you'll start seeing differentiation in the marketplace. Companies that effectively deploy AI versus don't, you will start seeing adoption gaps and all kinds of other things. It will become very apparent and visible in my view. So we'll see.
Good point, Tushar. I mean, from our perspective, I mean, we use, some AI in our service, and I feel with any technology, before you become an expert, you need to be an amateur, and before an amateur, you're a novice. So it's better to get, earlier to the game in terms of experimentation rather than, hoping you get, an amazing implementation from day one. It's not, probably not going to happen. Bill, you're working with some of these, vendors making these, you know, aggressive claims. Like, what do you advise them?
Well, I can't say that my own clients are making aggressive claims. However, look, they're trying to get projects, right? And they are gonna, the nature of a vendor and the salespeople often, that's the nature of sales, right? The salespeople outrun the tech people in a company, and they want to close the deal. So it's a matter of prudence, before you implement a system, there needs to be a due diligence process. It can't be, you can't, I mean, it's malpractice to rely on a vendor's representations, frankly, when you're dealing with systems like this that could have severe impact. So there need to be the agency is going to need to develop clear measurable metrics that they are requiring their vendors to comply with, and then they need to have they need to be able to benchmark those. They need to be able to test them, right? Again, reliance on the vendor is really not an option. And so along those lines, there need to be independent audits. There need to be clearly some kind of, I mean, agencies would always do this, but there need to be pilot testing, so that you're testing the system internally and you're taking ownership and validating that your metrics are being met. And again, besides the representations that the vendors are making, you need to be able to ask the vendor to provide as much supporting documentation to support their representations. Because even though they're checking off the boxes on the RFP, but they need to be able to support those. And if they don't have the documentation, if they can't really support it, then that's a red flag right there.
Great point, Bill. So let's move to our next topic, which I think of as citizen development. Spencer, you had given some great examples within the VA of kind of non-technical people, for instance, clinicians being able to wade in and leverage AI. And I think this is one of the more fascinating aspects of technology, where there's a life cycle where the real hardcore technologists start off with something, and eventually technology finds its way into the hands of the lay person, for better or for worse. So when you think of like the citizen development, so the non-technologists working with AI, attempting to implement AI, is that a good thing? And then what are some of the considerations, including IP?
Sorry. Democratization, right? Like, it's a very difficult concept. I think that you have to look at it as two ways, right? Like, we want to help drive innovation, especially in like the VA. I mean, I'm not sure if people know the history, but our electronic medical record, which was the leading medical record for many years, was fully developed from the ground up. People here, people there, people that, just continued to add components to it, right? And that set the standard for electronic health records in the world in some ways. So, like, we're constantly conflicted with this like traditional understanding of how important that is, right, to drive, with the secondary fear and real risk of what quality assurance is actually done with that. And I think in today's world, I think one of the biggest things, and I don't mean any disrespect to people, but I have like very highly regarded data scientists that for cloud computing, things like that, that you recognize pretty easily don't understand the technology, right? And so I think that, to me, the reason that we have, I don't know any other way to do it other than kind of what we've been working on with VA, right? Is to create a framework that you can allow some governance and understanding and capture some knowledge, skills, and abilities, of those people prior to allowing anything to go like into production, right? To something, I think we're okay with people within the confines of data security and everything, experimenting. It's not touching the patients, right? But we think that there is absolutely a lot of scrutiny has to go into productionizing. I hope that got to it. I'm not quick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Tushar, I mean, you have people from federal agencies, coming through for training. Are they all comp sci grads, or are you seeing some sociology majors in there as well?
So the short answer is no. The longer answer is I think and this is a famous statement from the NVIDIA CEO, right? Majority of the code will be written by AI, right? We had that statement the last quarterly from Sundar Pichai, Google. It's 25% of the code is written by AI at Google. Prior to that, Andy Jassy made a similar statement. So um, I think what happens, and we're already seeing it, is that algorithms become a commodity. Even the language models start becoming a commodity. You can go to Hugging Face today and download small language models for free, and you can start using them, download them onto your machine and start using them. So what does citizen development mean in AI age? I think that definition almost changes. It's not about writing AI models. It's rather about the applicability or customization of those AI models. And that's where a lot of opportunities remain. And you read books on 4 waves of AI or whatever, right? And we are just in the very initial stages of the first wave where we are building picks and shovels. But in the second and third waves of AI, as we think through the applications, that's where the real opportunities will come in, whether it is at an enterprise level to figure out how to implement the AI, or there will be individual personalized agents. Think of it as my own AI agent, maybe Siri when it grows up, or I'm still waiting, or Alexa or whatever, right? So, and I'll be able to really train that agent or influence the way that agent works. Siri, don't say this to that person next time. Siri, make sure that if this happens and my claim is again rejected by my doctor, you reach out to the insurance company and do this. And if they still say no, pull me into the call or whatever, right? So my agent talks to your agent to figure out what is going on and then pulls me in if and when needed. And there are all kinds of those kinds of combinations that will start happening in the not so distant future. And I think that's a real opportunity for citizen development, for customization, and really influencing how AI works in our world.
Excellent. So we're going to turn to our last question. We have about 2 minutes left. So it's a good follow-on to citizen development. So experimentation, fast following, and Spencer, you mentioned the righteous organization. We all want to be part of a righteous organization. I guess the alternative doesn't sound so hot. And you were mentioning our prep, talking about how AI's helping to drive moving away from kind of this clumsy, really formal, expensive procurement process to a more innovative, collaborative process. And in prior webinars, we talked about the government really leading on tech 20, 30 years ago, but now there's so much innovation within the private sector, the academic community, that government has to become more of a fast follower. So maybe Bill, we'll start with you and kind of do a minute each to close out the webinar. You're on mute, Bill.
Add a little bit to the citizen development issue, because there's the people at all different levels will be using AI, in the system. So you can be looking at the main projects of an agency, and those have certain guardrails around them regarding usage. But you also have people at all levels using it for all different ways. So you want to have that kind of usage, but you also need protection around it. And the kind of protection you get from that is really through having guidelines in place and a regular training regarding the data that's being used and the IP that it could be developed through that use. And again, you want to encourage it because it's going to encourage innovation, but you need to have the guardrails around it.
Excellent. Spencer? And looking at kind of the whole experimentation and fast follow.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you piece out a lot of what I talked about today, it covers it, right? Like synthetic data, the need to be rapidly agile, to secure the data across. I think that what's interesting is, in a lot of ways, we kind of jumped because of technology, right? Like especially big data. A lot of academia didn't, have a lot of big data at their access versus we did. So, that's where I think we train back to academia, right? Is like, how do you use these more new technologies to experiment? Like how to use data. I don't want to use company names, but there's some very common companies out there, right? That give you the opportunity to use multilingual code in a notebook. So you don't have to know one code. You can do R or Spark or whatever. I think that's kind of what we're introducing to academia, and academia giving us some, like working together on ideation, experimentation. I think that the final kind of just part of that is I think it goes so fast and has changed so much. I just read last night a great quote from 10 years ago on the Genesis model, which is a huge computing platform that takes care of genetics, right? The quote in there was like, the future is CPU, not PhD. And I was like, that is insightful and crazy how outdated it already is, right? Like the fact is like you can't even really do CPU, like you can't even use CPU to actually do that. Like that's what led to GPU. So anyway, I think that's it, right? Like you just got to have those partnerships and you got to kind of build safe playgrounds.
Excellent. Final word from Tushar.
Sure. So in order to build a righteous organization in the AI age, you have to experiment. You have to constantly experiment. It can't be one experiment, two experiments. I'm done experimenting. I experiment at the beginning. It is continuous experimentation, continuous learning, and fast following is just a way of implementing other people's learnings. So you are constantly learning for yourself. You're constantly learning from other people's experiences. You're sharing your learnings, and you are constantly building and rebuilding and reshaping, whether it is the internal enterprise and how the operations work, or how your external facing products and services work. Right. That's the AI centric future we are marching towards, I suppose.
Awesome. Great place to leave it, Tushar. I want to thank Tushar, Spencer, and Bill for a great session on AI and IP. We covered a lot of ground, but there's much more to cover. So we'll put together a write-up, send it out to the registrants, and really want to thank everyone for their time, especially our panelists.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.